Have you ever wondered why some habits quietly drain your energy while others seem to restore it, almost without effort, over many years? I am 95 years old as I speak these words, and I am not here to sell you a miracle, a formula, or a guarantee. I have no interest in telling you that one choice will save you or that another will doom you. I am simply a man who has lived long enough to notice patterns, not theories, not trends, but everyday patterns repeated thousands of times at ordinary tables, in ordinary kitchens, across ordinary decades. When people ask me how I eat, they often expect something dramatic, a secret rule, a forbidden food, a rigid system. They are usually disappointed. What I learned was simple, almost embarrassingly so. I ate less meat than I once did, and I slowly made vegetables and fruits a larger part of my plate. Not overnight, not perfectly, and certainly not as a commandment. In my younger years, meat sat at the center of every meal, as if a meal was incomplete without it. Vegetables were decoration, fruit was an afterthought. Over time, I noticed how heavy meals made me feel afterward. Not sick, not ill, just weighed down, slower, less clear. I didn't panic. I adjusted. I reduced portions. I skipped meat on some days. I filled the space with plants that were already there waiting. This was never about denial. It was about balance. I did not stop eating meat. I stopped letting it dominate. I did not chase health promises. I listened to how my body responded to simpler meals. What I want to share with you is not a claim, but an observation. When food feels lighter, life often does too. And sometimes the smallest changes are the easiest to live with for a very long time. As the years went on, I began to understand something that younger men rarely believe. Habits don't need to be dramatic to be decisive. They only need to be repeatable. What changed my eating was not fear, not a diagnosis, not a book or an expert on a stage. It was attention, quiet attention paid to how I felt before a meal, during it, and afterward. When meat was the center of my plate, I noticed a certain heaviness that followed me into the afternoon. Not pain, not illness, just a dull weight, as if my body had been handed more work than it wanted at that moment. I did not blame the meat itself. I blamed the amount, the frequency, the assumption that more was always better. So I experimented gently. One less serving, one meal without it, then another, nothing heroic, nothing strict. What surprised me was how naturally vegetables and fruits stepped forward to fill the space. When meat stepped back, other foods were no longer crowded out. Greens, beans, roots, apples, berries, foods that had always been around but never invited to lead. I didn't force myself to love them. I learned to prepare them simply so they tasted like themselves. A bowl of vegetables didn't feel like sacrifice when it was seasoned well and eaten without resentment. I also noticed something important. Vegetables and fruits did not demand much from me. They did not sit heavily in my stomach. They did not leave me sluggish. Meals felt complete without feeling excessive. Digestion became quieter, almost invisible, which is how the body seems to prefer it. I was not chasing efficiency. I was noticing ease. Limiting meat for me was never about rules like only once a week or never again. It was about frequency and portion. Meat became one part of the meal instead of the anchor. Sometimes it wasn't there at all, and nothing was missing. Other times it was present, smaller, respected, rather than relied upon. This shift alone changed how I approached eating, from habit to choice. Fruits played a different role. They brought lightness. A piece of fruit between meals satisfied me in a way heavier snacks never did. It didn't push me into extremes of hunger or fullness. It simply carried me forward. Over time, fruit replaced things I ate out of boredom rather than need. That was an unexpected gift. Eating became more intentional without becoming rigid. I want to be clear about something. I am not telling you that vegetables and fruits will fix you. I am telling you they are easier to live with. They ask less of the body while still giving something back. Freshness, variety, simplicity. When your meals ask less of you, your days tend to feel less crowded. Another thing I learned is that food choices ripple outward. When meals became lighter, my evenings felt calmer. Sleep came more easily. I woke with less heaviness in my head. Not dramatically, gradually. And that gradual change is important. Sudden transformations rarely last. Gentle shifts often do. I also learned to stop arguing with myself at the table. No guilt, no virtue, just observation. If a meal left me tired, I remembered it. If another left me steady, I remembered that too. Over time, memory does the work that discipline often fails to do. You naturally return to what serves you without being ordered to. People sometimes ask me if I miss eating the way I once did. I tell them the truth. I miss nothing that made me feel worse afterward. Enjoyment is not just about taste in the moment. It's about how you feel an hour later. Vegetables and fruits quietly win that argument again and again. There is also something grounding about eating foods that feel closer to the earth. I don't mean morally, I mean practically. They remind you that meals don't need to be complicated. A few ingredients prepared well can be enough. When food becomes simpler, life often follows. I never measured nutrients or counted anything. I simply noticed balance returning when meat no longer dominated every plate. Balance is not a target you hit once. It's a posture you maintain. Some days you lean one way, some days another. What matters is the general direction over time. If there is one lesson in all of this, it is that moderation is not deprivation. Reducing meat did not shrink my meals. It expanded them. Adding vegetables and fruits did not restrict me. It diversified me. Eating became less about proving something and more about sustaining something. This way of eating does not demand belief. It only asks for attention. You don't need to trust me. You only need to notice yourself. Over weeks and months, patterns reveal themselves without persuasion. I am 95 now, and my relationship with food feels peaceful. Not perfect, peaceful. Meals fit into my life instead of taking it over. And that, more than any promise, is what makes a habit worth keeping. As I grew older, the meaning of food shifted again, not because my body demanded something new, but because my attention became sharper. When you have lived long enough, you stop looking for dramatic answers. You begin to value what is sustainable, what can be repeated quietly without strain. That is where limiting meat and leaning into vegetables and fruits truly settled into my life. Not as a decision, but as a rhythm. I learned that eating this way removed tension from my days. Not tension in the muscles, but in the mind. There was less negotiation at meals, less mental noise. When vegetables and fruits formed the base of what I ate, choices became simpler. I no longer asked myself what I deserved to eat. I asked what would carry me through the day without friction. One thing that became clear is how forgiving plant-heavy meals are. If you eat a little too much, the body adjusts easily. If you eat a little too little, hunger returns gently rather than urgently. That steadiness matters more with age. Sharp swings in energy become harder to tolerate. Vegetables and fruits seem to smooth those swings, keeping the body in a narrower, calmer range. Limiting meat also changed how I experienced hunger. Heavy meals used to blur the line between hunger and habit. I ate because it was time, not because I needed it. With lighter meals, hunger became clearer and more honest. I knew when I needed food and when I didn't. That clarity removed a quiet burden I hadn't known I was carrying. I also noticed how food affected movement. When meals were simpler, moving my body felt easier. Walking after eating no longer felt like effort. I didn't need to rest as long before standing or stretching. Again, no miracle, just less resistance. When the body isn't preoccupied with digestion, it seems more willing to cooperate with the rest of life. There is also a psychological ease in eating foods that do not demand justification. Vegetables and fruits don't invite internal debates. No bargaining, no defense. They simply exist as food. That neutrality matters. It keeps eating from becoming emotional work. Over decades, reducing emotional labor around meals may matter more than the meals themselves. I want to be careful here. I am not saying meat is harmful or that it must be avoided. I am saying it asks more of the body, and asking less more often has its advantages. Meat became something I chose with intention, not something I assumed by default. That shift alone changed my relationship with food. Another subtle change appeared in social settings. When meat was no longer central for me, I became more flexible. I could eat what was available without disappointment. A plate of vegetables felt sufficient. A piece of fruit felt complete. Eating became adaptable instead of demanding. That adaptability brings a quiet freedom. Fruits, in particular, taught me patience. They satisfy without rushing. They don't overwhelm the senses. They don't push you to eat more than you need. They arrive, they offer sweetness, and they leave. That gentleness mirrors how I try to live now, taking what is offered without excess. Over time, I realized that limiting meat and increasing vegetables and fruits simplified my shopping, my cooking, and my thinking. Fewer decisions, fewer complications, simpler preparation. This matters as energy becomes more precious. When food supports life instead of organizing it, you gain time and attention for other things. I also learned to stop framing food as a solution to anything beyond hunger and nourishment. Food is not a reward or a punishment. It is maintenance. Vegetables and fruits fit that role well. They maintain without drama. They support without spectacle. Some people search for motivation to change how they eat. I never found motivation useful. What lasted was comfort. This way of eating felt comfortable enough to continue. That is the only standard that matters. If a habit cannot be lived with easily, it will eventually be abandoned. What I share with you is not advice carved in stone. It is an invitation to notice where ease exists in your own meals, where heaviness appears, where simplicity might help. You don't need to remove anything completely. You only need to shift emphasis. If you let vegetables and fruits take up more space, something else naturally takes up less. No force required. Balance happens quietly when you stop crowding the plate. At this stage of my life, I value habits that do not ask me to argue with myself. Eating this way does not. It feels settled, and settled habits are the ones that stay. So if you ask me what my secret is, I will disappoint you by saying there is no secret at all. There is only attention, practiced over many years, and a willingness to choose what feels lighter rather than what feels louder. Limiting meat and eating more vegetables and fruits was never a declaration. It was a quiet adjustment that stayed because it did not demand effort to maintain. I did not remove meat from my life. I removed its dominance. I allowed it to become one option among many instead of the centerpiece of every meal. In doing so, space opened up, on the plate and in the body. Vegetables and fruits filled that space without asking for permission, offering simplicity rather than persuasion. What I hope you take from this is not instruction, but reassurance. You do not need extreme changes to make meaningful ones. You do not need certainty about outcomes to make sensible choices. You only need to notice how your body responds and allow those responses to guide you gently over time. Eating more vegetables and fruits does not require belief. It requires presence. Limiting meat does not require sacrifice. It requires proportion. When food aligns with ease, life often feels less crowded by effort. At 95, I have learned to value habits that fit into life rather than reshape it entirely. This way of eating fit. It still does. It does not promise anything beyond what it delivers. Meals that feel balanced, digestion that feels calmer, and days that move forward without resistance. If you choose to adjust how you eat, do it slowly. Let repetition do the work. Let comfort decide what stays. Over time, simple choices repeated quietly become the ones you no longer think about. And those are the habits that carry you the farthest. That is all I have to offer. No guarantees, no rules, just a pattern that proved easy enough to live with for a very long time.